In the summer of 2017, I understood that, among other things, I was investigating a pension racket that was trafficking women, specifically and directly connected to Super Bowl 51 in Houston, Texas. I believed that I had been attempted for enticement into cooperation, and when I refused, I was retaliated against, including by police. And at the same time, when I was trying to deal with the factors connected to the fact that I had been kidnapped as retaliation for trying to report other crimes, at some point I took it upon myself to apply what was available under the Texas Code of Military Justice as well as the Texas Government Code and begin a process of engaging in an interim role as a means by which to prepare to step up into the role of Attorney General, pending an appropriate response and constitutional process by which to address acts of sedition that I understood were ongoing at the time. There's a variety of things that I understood were evidentiary of overt acts of sedition by people alleging to represent the people of Texas in various government roles, including within the judicial branch, but also within the legislative branch, and that the public corruption was so pervasive that what was needed was an extraordinary process. And so one of the things I did is I kept daily reports. At one point, I had over 40 of them. At this time, I have probably about 25%, maybe not even 25% of the reports I wrote. I had them on thumb drives, and two times the thumb drives I had that had all of my reports, all of my evidence that I had accumulated at that time, including legal theories, including outlines for what would have been actual criminal cases, were stolen. And I was, put on the streets at a particular period of time. But in addition to that were certain kinds of reports that I wrote. One of the reports I wrote is currently dated for August 14th of 2017, at least according to the file in terms of when it was created, and I believe that would be an accurate understanding of when it would have been written. This was written after I personally had experienced certain factors, and I wrote it with an understanding of attempted collegiality with other people that would be on that level. If somebody has taken this in the meantime and misused it and or tried to use it in their behalf or for their defense, then please understand this was supposed to be a report being compiled that had not been released yet as part of what I understood to be an official execution of duties in a process of assuming the roles of the Attorney General for the state of Texas. I was not playing. I was not deluded. I was not role playing or proxying. I really understood prior to Hurricane Harvey that there was an absolutely explicit and intentional effort at sedition in effect at that time. And among the things it was trying to do was trying to use acts of sex trafficking and compelled prostitution to get people to cooperate with criminal activity. This is what I wrote. I'm just going to read it. I understand that various methods of magnetism technology can be focused on people's chakra areas to create a variety of types of repellence attraction. This is a particular formation for women. A few days ago, when I was meditating on the manner in how a woman's literal uterus was targeted as part of the digital economy, some voice said, "You weren't supposed to know." I think that means that various drugs, painkillers, or psychoactives that impact brain chemistry were supposed to make the physiological indicators, namely pressure or pain around the cervix, wherein the uterus is actually being targeted in the commission of a transaction, non-detectable. But years ago, when I started realizing that this was being done, namely mid to end of 2009, I said I was going to remain conscious of these sorts of sensations. Then, when I was diagnosed and prescribed psychotropics, my mind was completely numbed. I was practically incapable of engaging in any sort of self-initiation discussions of cerebral application, and my body dealt with all kinds of other pains that masked whatever was going on. I had no stimulation or any other sorts of sensation regarding sexuality. It wasn't until after I stopped taking the psychotropics that I regained my cognitive functioning, self-regulated pain levels, and became conscious of the variables being transmitted digitally through my neurochemistry to attract me to certain places or states of mind for the successful application of the process to complete the transaction. Every sexual encounter I've engaged in, including masturbation, has been linked to some sort of trade deal or large scale contract execution, at least since 2009. I can make a list, but will not here. It was verified real time through a metaphorical allusion and corresponded to particular identifiers that were put on the encounter by the person's introduction and discussion about themselves, where they came from, or what they did. There was then some sort of graphic interface to create a mental scenario, and, fortunately or unfortunately, rather than just be able to enjoy the visual image while I experienced physical pleasure, I was also able to be conscious of a series of pneumatic indicators attached to guiding the transaction that let me know that rather than being able to engage in some sort of sexual activity of personal gratification connected to sex, I had been stimulated at a particular time to engage in sexual activity so that my bioenergy could actually be used to create various frequency dynamics that literally moved the transactional processes. The accuracy of this increased over time, but also correlated with a significant decrease in my willingness to acknowledge physical pleasure or sexual stimulation. It was only through later investigation that I could actually track the transaction of the concurrent processes that were occurring literally using my bioenergy as an act of commerce of which I had no foreknowledge and was never given an opportunity to consent to, and never put into a position to personally profit from. On the contrary, my refusal to accept certain performance standards was used to downgrade me or subject me to increasing risk scenarios to which other transactions could be bundled. Ironically, or not so ironically, the more I refused to, the greater the valuation for someone else became. My increasing deprivation or amortization was almost directly proportional to the value of the transactional process being run. An election is also a form of transaction. Only once was I ever at the time that my bioenergy was being strategically sought to participate in guiding an election's energy. The way it seems to work is that the surge of energy is connected to a candidate or slate of candidates, not necessarily from the same party or political persuasion. And when I consent to permitting pleasure upon myself, it is as if there is a blessing of those who have been assigned. On one hand, this is humiliating. On another hand, I refuse to feel humiliation. This is especially why I made a conscious effort to forego any sorts of companionship or personal pleasure when I was aware that Puerto Rico was voting for its independence. The Puerto Rican independence scam had already been strategically assigned to me while I was in Chicago, even though I did not know the full implications. The vote and its outcome was coordinated to connect with various development contracts. Once I realized this, I said I would not interfere. Let me just honestly say this. If there is something natural about connecting the energy that comes from the sort of ecstasy that one has in a sexual act with any sort of confidence voters or candidates have at election time, this doesn't necessarily have to be a bad thing. But I do not think it is appropriate for me to be dinged at a particular time in order to remotely influence election results in places that I have no responsibility toward, connection to materially, or that might interfere with individuals from those places when it comes to choosing their political representation. Not only that, I believe it is an incredible disrespect to me to play out some bullshit scenario about how I am so loved or how beautiful I am in order to manipulate my biorhythms to accomplish a political agenda I have not been apprised of, consented to, or been offered a legitimate and respectful way to participate in. I do not want to be a candidate one day trying to run for public office and have my election sabotaged by some fake queen or woman who is powerful and is being intentionally brain fucked to pull off someone else's political agenda. I also have to admit that my effort to reach out once prior to an election was actually used by that organization to put me in a position to use me directly to influence the election results without even acknowledging that I had reached out to participate in a legitimate political manner. I cannot say for sure who was responsible for that manipulation, and immediately after I became aware of it, I did go through an emotional process wherein I debated whether or not I could accept that, or even be happy that it had worked. But in the end, it only serves to continue invisibilizing me and justifying a continuation of the trafficking syndicate that has taken too much of my life. If it is an actually powerful thing and recognized as such, and indeed it is powerful, then I should not be mired in shame, scorned, told I am crazy for trying to reveal attendant fraud, and left on the streets constantly subjected to conversation about sex and priority to anything else I have to offer. The only time I was conscious that I was being dinged to render a decision on an election outcome was at the 2017 presidential election in the United States, and rather than be approached as a goddess, I was sent visualization of young people being disrespected and bombarded with physical pain, intentionally meant to aggravate me. At the moment of the decision, I was triggered to decide on Clinton, but whoever did that knew I would never willingly condone the election of Hillary Clinton. I would not condone Trump either, but I was literally being assaulted on the floor of a domestic violence shelter after trying to report on criminal activity involving the political process, and said that if this was the sort of situation a woman like me was going to be left to, then how did America deserve any better than Trump? Then they stopped beating me. There are other elections that have similar dynamics. One in particular I did not know was an election at the time, but the results were precisely numbers that I had been investigating, meditating on, and I had read a report about 2 weeks prior about the upcoming election, some concerns people had about the potential results. It was that precise. The worst part is that the most accurate ones and the ones that accompanied what was at the time the most pleasant scenarios involved political groups that I might otherwise have wanted to support in some manner. But then again, maybe not. And now what? Would I ever be able to engage politically with members of the winning election results if I were to be put in a position of political representation? Would I still be expected to be some sort of comrade and have sex with a member of the group to close a deal or hook up a contract? If I were to disagree with a policy decision, would I be extorted with some threat to reveal my sexual prowess and have it twisted as some sort of fraud or election interference? Am I supposed to keep my mouth shut and go with the flow? How is it that I'm so important that someone can hook up their international treaty deal using my orgasm, but they cannot actually speak to me about my understanding of political dynamics or what I could offer in terms of leadership to actually building and sustaining a productive and just society? Part 1.